Thank you. All of that she said is grossly overestimated. And I'm going to try and do something that I've never done before and operate two of these at the same time so I can actually see my notes. Not that I'll actually refer to them. First of all, it's nice to have the opportunity to visit with you. And I will mention one of the things I do as a hobby is grow a lot of native plants. I brought 25 of the 1,000 or so I have in pots at my yard right now. And Terry can verify that. There are Texas asters, Turk's caps, one beautyberry left, and a couple of flamacanthus in there. If you want to take them, please do. If you don't take them, I'll have to take them home and give them to somebody else. So, and I know it's July, and I know it's not the right time to plant, but you know what? Baby, we're not talking 20 or 25 you're putting in the ground. Just baby them a little bit, get them in the ground, and they'll do wonders for you. So, and for the insects and the birds and all that good stuff. So anyway, so this presentation I'm giving tonight, I've given in a lot of different forms. I'm doing it tonight not as a TPWD employee, but as myself. Because technically, I'm not supposed to be giving this presentation as a TPWD employee. So, because my funding isn't for this, believe it or not. So, so you have to bear with me here. This is a little bit different than I normally do. But I want to start off, and you notice I said a personal journey. And sadly, Patsy might be right that I am still 9 years old. And Terry can probably verify there are times I probably am. But first of all, I'm not a native Texan. I grew up in Iowa. I grew up in a sports family. 3 brothers, everybody was into sports. My dad was a sports hero in high school. So the assumption was that we were all going to be sports figures. And I grew up being really weird and different from everybody else in my family. And fortunately, I always had this bug about nature, and I don't know why. I didn't have any mentors as a child. I didn't have anybody to look up to. My grandfather was a fisherman and a farmer, and he would take me fishing. So I got outside then. And then for some of you that are old enough, you might remember when we had paper routes. You actually had the bag, and you had to go put the, and you didn't get driven around by your mom and dad, or just throw it out on the, the lawn. We had to put it in the slot or the mailbox or whatever. And so when I got old enough, I had a morning route. So I got up every morning at 4:30 in the morning before anybody else. And I had to walk across our town, which, by the way, is a small town. And back when I was a kid, it seemed like miles, and I think maybe less than a mile to get to my route. But when I got to go every morning, it was dark. So I would hear the nighthawks overhead. If it was that time of the year. In the wintertime, I might get lucky and hear an owl. On my way, I'd walk through blizzards. This is going to sound, I walked through blizzards. I literally did walk through blizzards to deliver the papers. The post office people, they at least had a vehicle to get for where they were going. But it was a time for me to be outside. So when I walked to my route, I had to cross a creek. I had to walk through a pine forest. Planted pine. It seemed like a pine forest, but it was just a bunch of planted pine trees as a windbreak. Cross another creek. And I was lucky to get to school on time every day, to be honest with you. And then at night, at the end of the week, we had to go collect. So we had these little ticket stubs that you had to go get your $2 from the people and hope they didn't argue that $2 was way more than they should be giving me for the newspaper and those kind of things. And when I was a kid, I was frightened of the dark. So I'd be walking along in the dark. And think about this. I was carrying buckets of money with me as a kid walking down a street, and thought nothing of it, that I was going to be robbed or anything like that. But while I was out, I was able to listen for nature. I was able to look up at the stars. Didn't know anything about the stars, other than it was all very cool. So the natural world was in me when I was very young, and continued to be that way. And then growing up in Iowa, I was surrounded by not too much nature. It was mostly cornfields, soybean fields, some pastures with cows and things like that. And then when I went to college, I went to North Dakota. Got in my car at 18 and drove to Botno, North Dakota to go to a forestry school. I thought, oh my gosh, this is freedom. But instead of getting to drive the gold Celica that I really wanted to buy. My grandpa gave me a 1968 Ford Galaxy 500 that was so rusted out that they wouldn't pass it through inspection until I put metal plates into the bottom of it. And it was purple and no AC. And every gravel road, all the dust blew into the back, through the back seat of the car and filled up, and it was hard to breathe. But I got that freedom, and when I got to North Dakota, and all those wetlands and the prairie potholes and the waterfowl, and it was like I was released. It was like, oh my God, this is what it was. That's where I was meant to be, was up in those places. And so I went to school, realized that forestry was more about marking and cutting down trees, and I didn't want to do that. So I ended up in wildlife. I ended up back in Arkansas, and that was my journey, my personal journey to that's led incredibly lucky life to be where I am today. And throughout my entire career, I've been in this business now in one way or another over 40 years. And by gosh, I've got to do what I wanted to do for a life. And then it wasn't that long ago, I met this lovely lady over here. And for some reason, she seemed like I was the legit deal. Although I don't know, the jury might be still out. I don't know, any given day. And she lived in Boerne, and I lived in a little one room. I rented a room, and we bought a house. And if I can get this to go now, there we go. And we went to look, we wanted to buy a house, so we went to look for this house back in 2018, and we saw this little house, and it was small, and the blue color on the trim was kind of, well, different. And the yard had nothing to really, I did have some sotol plants. I believe there were 4 total. And then everything else was non-native. And there was no fence, there was, nothing. But here's where it gets good. We go to the backyard, and there was a greenhouse. And I said, we must buy this house. And we must buy it before anyone bids it to get the greenhouse. I mean, the greenhouse. No, we actually wanted the home, but the greenhouse was a bonus, without a doubt. And it was overpriced, probably. we can concur on that. But it was on the end of the dead-end street. Cibolo Creek was right across the street from us. And even though we were living in a biological desert, we had a greenhouse. And when I was, one of my first jobs as a naturalist was at a place called Dodge Nature Center in West St. Paul, Minnesota. And they happened to have a greenhouse. And I got to learn, well, when I first got there, we did a plant program for kids, and we cut wandering Jew. We'd cut it off, stick it in a pot, and the kids would come back 2 months. So I was like, well, this is not that exciting. And then they decided to do a prairie restoration, and I'd never done anything like it. And I started learning how to grow prairie plants and put them in the ground. And that was the coolest thing. Except that when we were teaching kids to put them in the ground, the seedlings, they were actually putting in the ground upside down. That's how, what a challenge we had. It's like, no, those are not the roots. The roots aren't green. We had a greenhouse. And as a result of that, I was ready to get started. And we have that greenhouse, when we bought it, by the way, was all the wood slats were rotted out. And the panels were so dirty, I don't know how sunlight got through the thing. And so this young man over here came one summer. His name's Ethan. He is Terry's nephew. And he and I took this thing apart and rebuilt it completely with new wood. And you'd never done anything like that before, had you? And so I forced him to work, manual labor. I will tell you, though, the old greenhouse was cut with actual 2x2s. So when I went to buy the lumber to replace it, there were no 2x2s. They were 1 3/4 by 1 3/4. So if you ever come to my house and see my greenhouse, there's a lot of gaps. Okay, that's ventilation for the plants when it gets hot. Just so you know. So anyway, so with that greenhouse, I started up this plot to start growing my own plants. And we would go out on roadside ditches and we would find seeds, or we'd go find somebody that was mowing an area next to a motel that was covered with wildflowers. And I would stop my car and get out, and I'd walk over with a digging trowel, and they'd be looking at me like, what are you doing? And sometimes they spoke English, and sometimes they didn't speak English, and I would just hold the trowel up and go here in front of the mower, and I would dig the plants up and walk off, and they would continue their mowing. And that's how all of this got started. And it's been a joy ever since, frankly. And so that greenhouse led to a planting area, and led to me building a rolling cart with an old kitchen sink for the place to throw the soil in to be able to pot the plants. It then led, the next step, it led to putting every table we had out because I had too many plants to fit in the greenhouse. And then it led to our picnic table being covered up with plants. And this was our first, what we call a conestoga. And to keep the hot sun off of these plants so they could survive. And that led to building rolling carts that we could just fill with soil to grow some plants because I didn't have enough pots. And then that led going and talking to our neighbor and building 2 more conestogas in her old garden bed. One's 15 feet long, the other one's 18 feet long, so that I could have more places for plants. Please take these tonight. Okay, please. But so this has become a real passion for me, and it's a hobby. It's a little bit expensive, but not bad. It is an obsession. Okay, fine, whatever word you want to use. But the reason I love this stuff is because, as you all know, being birders or whatever it is you do, the natural world is awesome. And if we start thinking about, the reason I like native plants is because look at that, 4 species, and look at the diversity of what you see of form and function. It's just magnificent to me. And then to be able to watch what those insects are doing that visit those flowers, and how those flowers are actually communicating with the insects that are visiting them is just, it's magical. For example, if you take that plant that is kind of a weedy thing that grows in roadside ditches every spring, no, not really, you know, I'm just joking. But if you take that plant, how many of you knew that when that plant is flowering like that, that when that flower, center of that flower turns purple, that's a sign to the bees that do not visit me. They only, and because they've already been pollinated. And a lot of plants do that, okay? And so I thought, first time I heard that, I thought, that's ridiculous. There's no way that's possible. So I went out on I-10 between Boerne and Comfort, and I found a patch of these weeds, and I sat in the middle of them. And by the way, I didn't encounter any rattlesnakes. I always heard that rattlesnakes live in bluebonnet patches. I don't know how true that is, but whatever. I guess if you've got enough people out in the middle of them taking pictures, somebody's going to run into a rattlesnake. And I sat and I watched the bees visit these flowers, and not one of them went to a flower that had a purple center. They only ever went to the ones with the white centers, the new flowers. So that's going on. So not only do we have these beautiful forms and functions, we've got this communication going on between the pollinators and the plants, and then you get to these guys. Oh my God, sunflowers, the composite family. What a great plant. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going to only plant one plant to attract pollinators, make sure it's one of these composites, okay? Because on every head, on every stem, there may be 100 or 200 or sometimes 3,000 flowers on one head. That's why we have so much thistle, by the way. And if you're a pollinator, that's like going to, what was it, Bob Evans, or, you know, eat, 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 and eat more. And again, the form and function is just absolutely spectacular. And so what do these plants need? So one of the things that when I started this gardening and I had this interest all along, it's like, I want them there for me, being selfish, But what do they need? And it's pretty simple. They need a place to grow. They need water and they need pollinators. Okay? And they also need to be in the right habitat. Right? So the great news is there's so much diversity. There's over 5,000 species of flowering plants in Texas. There's lots of choices. Okay? Lots of choices. So we can go out and find these now. And of course, you can go to native plant sales. You all know this, in places and find these to be able to go. You can go talk to a guy like that that grows some of his own stuff. Maybe he'll sell you something. I don't know. Part with something. And then of course we've got the pollinators. So the next stage we get the flowers. Now the reason I planted all those flowers was because I wanted pollinators. I wanted to see butterflies and bees. What I didn't know is I was going to get to see a whole lot of wasps too. Okay, how many of you love wasps? There should be more hands up actually, but that's okay. Hopefully I will convince you why you should like wasps. Well, we've got all these wonderful pollinators and you get to watch them do their thing and they're carrying pollen in different ways. I never knew leaf-cutting bees stored their pollen on hairs on their abdomen. Well, we grew up thinking the bee put it on its back leg, right, and flew off. Well, there's way more, there's different ways to skin a cat, as they say. And when you get to see all of that going on, you get the native plants and you get the pollinators, all of a sudden you get to watch things happen and learn more about the natural world than you ever thought possible, and certainly more than you could read in a book. And so I shot this video a few years ago. This wildflower right here was blooming at Honey Creek State Natural Area. Anybody know what it is? Recognize that? You don't. What is it? It's at Honey Creek, which is right next to Guadalupe. This is called marble seed or false cromwell. Most people wouldn't give it a second thought. Little white flowers with green, a little bit of smear of green at the tip, hanging upside down, kind of blends in with all the other green. But this queen bumblebee was looking for food because she had to get enough food so she could start her nest, so she could lay her first eggs, so she had food to feed the babies. And so hopefully this will play. And so I started watching this bee because, oh, you know what? One of the things about those flowers is they hang upside down and the opening of the flower is actually closed. But sticking outside the flower is the pistil, the female part of the flower. Okay? And the stamens are actually mounted on the inside of those closed petals. So that means that an insect has to be able to push their way through that opening to get to the pollen or the nectar, which is all the way at the base or the top of the flower. And keep watching what starts to happen here. First of all, if you notice the bottom of her abdomen is starting to turn yellow, and even though it's in the sunlight, did you see that? Keep watching. May not be dark enough in here for you to see it really well. Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah, you actually be able to see it better over here. Now watch what happens here especially. So she's flying around, pushing her head through that flower. You see what just flew out? Keep watching, it's going to get better. There, see it? See it? What is that? Pollen. So this flower is upside down. The bee is like this. There's going to be more. Okay. So that pollen, when she gets her head in there, the pollen falls out, lands on her belly, right? Lands on the bottom of her thorax, the bottom of her abdomen. There goes a big patch of it. And so the next flower she goes to, the pistil that's outside the flower is in direct contact with her abdomen, spreading the pollen that way. And then the other thing I was sitting there going, well, why are they throwing pollen all over the place? Because the pistils are outside the flower. So that pistil is maybe catching some pollen grains floating through the air. So not only do we have animal pollination, we potentially have wind pollination in one flower. And a flower that most people don't know. And yet it's native right here in the hill country. Fascinating to me. Fascinating to me. So that's the kind of thing, once you start doing this kind of thing, you start getting to see. If you open yourself to it. And of course, bees aren't the only pollinators. There's all kinds of pollinators. Okay, some of them are better than others. By the way, a bee is nothing more than a hairy wasp. Evolutionarily, wasps arose first, bees came after them, they think. Okay, but wasps are also still decent pollinators. There's some hairs on them. If you get close enough, you'll see a few hairs on them. Monarchs, it turns out, are not good pollinators. But every time we talk pollinators, what butterfly comes up? Yeah. Okay. They're not hairy. One of the first rules of a good pollinator is you're hairy. Okay. One of the parts of the job description that's important. And then, of course, all of those pollinators that I'm now bringing to my yard because I planted all these flowers are now attracting birds because the birds are eating the insects. This sounds evil, doesn't it? Here I am planting flowers to attract pollinators, and then I look out my front door one time in the summer, and this was the summer that all these different wasps had showed up in my flowers. I'd never seen any of them before, and so I bought Heather Holmes' book, Wasps of Eastern North America, this huge tome of all these beautiful wasp pictures and descriptions, and I'm learning all these wasps. And one day I look out there and there's a family of summer tanagers that comes into my garden, and the next morning I couldn't find a wasp. Because it turns out summer tanagers love to eat wasps and bees. So I felt kind of bad about that for the wasps. And the crazy thing is I haven't had that many wasps back since. It's been 2 years. They really cleaned them up. But these birds then come, well, maybe not a barred owl, although barred owls will eat a big insect if they need to. Those birds are coming to my yard. Well, now, okay, I haven't had a paraloxia and I haven't had a vermilion. Yet. But I have had a barred owl. We had a barred owl in our yard once. So that's this whole thing, and it cascades. It starts with one thing and it grows into another. It's kind of like bird watching for some of you. You've been bird watching for a long time, and and maybe you've traveled the world like certain people in here and have life lists that are in the thousands and thousands of birds. But what happens to some bird watchers? They get to a point where they're like, okay, I've seen the same birds every day, all summer long. But hey, what's that butterfly over there? And I have a pair of binoculars, and I suddenly discover that using binoculars for butterfly identification is pretty easy to do. So the disease that you've had as a birder has now morphed into a new disease, a new stage. And suddenly you're looking at butterflies and you're buying a butterfly guide. And then when it really starts to get serious, and this is, I've gone through this and I'm still here. Then all of a sudden it's a really slow day for butterflies, and it's hot and it's July and the birds have kind of stopped singing and it's pretty quiet. But you walk by a little pond or a marsh or a creek, and there's all these fast-flying, silvery things flying around you. And you realize those are dragonflies, or their cousins, the damselflies. And suddenly, you look at those and go, oh my gosh, they're beautiful. And you go and you get a field guide, and you go, there's all kinds of different kinds of dragonflies and butterflies. And just like a lot of birds, the males and females look different. So now you've got third stage naturalist dementia. And now when it really gets bad, when it's terminal, is when you start doing grasshoppers. And I will tell you, the other day there was not much movement, and I got 8 species of grasshoppers photographed, most of whom I have no clue who they are, because there is no good field guide for grasshoppers, unless you're a grasshopper specialist, I guess. So that's the thing about this growing native plants, as it morphs into other things. It provides anybody that does it so many opportunities. So for example, what happens with some people is that they plant their plants and they walk away and go, okay, I've done my part. I planted these plants because I don't have to care for them. I don't have to worry about watering them because they're native plants, right? Well, that's all wrong. Okay? Plants need water. We said that already. And it's dry here most of the time, so they need water from us to survive. Okay? And because those native plants are not growing with all their buddies out in the wild, what can they become? Weeds. They can kind of transform from being this beautiful wildflower. All of a sudden you look out one year and you go, oh my God, it's taken over the entire yard. Right? And then all of a sudden you go, well, this is becoming a weed. I don't want it here anymore. But those are the kinds of things we start to learn, and we realize, oh, here's an opportunity to share this wildflower with all these other people and let them have these kind of weeds in their yard too. And of course, my ultimate goal is that my neighbors who have a biological desert of a yard, one day they're going to wake up and go, what are these plants growing in my yard? And it's already happening. Oh, yes, yes, we did get a pokeweed in the guy's live oak tree. I did not put it there, but one of the birds that I attracted because I had pokeweed in the yard and they ate the fruit, went over, pooped over there, and now I got a pokeweed. It wasn't doing very good until we got the recent rain. It's still a lot. So that leads to all of this. So a couple of things I wanted to share with you tonight. If you're going to do this, and I'm going to show you some pictures of what the yard looks like, there are things you need to think about. What do I already have in my yard? Sometimes you'll be surprised what's already there. You might have straggler daisy, might have, what is that, dichondra. You may have some natives that look weedy, but actually if you watch them, all the little butterflies and lots of little bees go and visit those tiny little straggler daisy flowers. So they can become very important. So what do I have? I wanted to focus on natives because the pollinators that live in my area are adapted to those native plants. Okay? All right. I selected composites, lots of composites, because again, I said on one head, there are hundreds of flowers. And so if you're a pollinator that has a short tongue, that's the other advantage of a lot of these, is that they have a very short flower. They can get in like flies, and other pollinators can drink. Okay? So think about that. And oh, by the way, that's why we have so many dandelions, and that's why one dandelion head produces, 80, 90 seeds, right? You do know the best way to get rid of dandelions. Anybody know? You eat them. You cut them off when they're flowering. You make up the thickest batter you can find. You dip them into the batter so that you can't see the flower head. You fry it up in oil, and they're delicious. And you never actually taste the dandelion. That batter is oh so good. All right. And then the other thing I did too is because I wanted to attract as much diversity as I could, I tried to put as much diversity in terms of what different kinds of flower shapes in my yard. So I have some that have a very long tube for moths that are flying around at night that have a long proboscis. Okay. I have different colors. One of the things, of course, I think hopefully everybody in this room knows, there's always been, for a lot of people, this thing that hummingbirds only come to red stuff. They feed on every flower in my yard. I've got 100 species of different wildflowers. They hit every one of them. Okay? So, yes, they come to red, but they come to white, they come to yellow, they come to blue, they come to everything else, everything in between. So I try to get as much diversity in my flowers as I can. And then the other thing is I try to make sure I plant plants so that I have them in bloom I used 4 seasons here because we don't really have winter, being a northerner. We have like 3 cold days and, you got to put on a jacket. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but not much. But I try to have multiple things blooming at all times of the year. If you're only going to go and plant one flower, plant something that blooms over and over again throughout an entire course of a season. Okay, so you got to learn what those things are and when they bloom. I also look at different sized flowers, as I've already mentioned. I look at different plant heights. Certain things are low flyers, like if I'm going to attract dainty sulfurs, which are tiny little yellow butterflies. I've never seen one. I swear, I've never seen one more than 5 feet off the ground. They fly low. They're going to feed on low plants. And of course, I always avoid pesticides and any kind of chemicals in the yard. And then, of course, where do you find them? Of course, you know that there are native plant sales that will be coming up this fall. Native plant rescues, people help go out and find those areas. If we ever sell our house, we'll have to have a native plant rescue because I'm guessing whoever buys it will come in and rip everything out. Yeah, they all get ripped out, don't they? Yeah. So I don't even want to think about it. You can go collect seeds. One of the things to keep in mind when you're collecting wild seeds, and when you buy wild seeds in a packet, and you go and throw them on your garden, and you go, okay, go. If they haven't been through winter, where it's been cool and moist, a lot of them aren't going to germinate for a whole year. Okay? They have to be stratified. They don't stratify them where you go and buy the packet. So you have to keep that in mind, and that's where the word patience comes in when you're using native plants. First of all, I just transplanted a bunch of 2-year-old coral leather flower. What is it? Leather flower? Yeah, but which one? The one with red? Scarlet leather flowers. The plants were this tall. They were 2 years old. Some of them had 6 whole leaves on them, and they were tiny, little bitty. I pulled them out of a 5-gallon pot. The roots were almost 2 feet long. Okay? So a lot of our native plants put roots down before they come up. That's pretty standard. So again, you have to be patient. You can't give up right away. They're not marigolds. Okay? Keep that in mind. So let's take a look at what we had. We buy this house. This is spring 2019. Leaves are coming out. Our yard is nothing more than a bunch of pecan trees and a bunch of non-native stuff. Front yard there, lower backyard in the back. And by the way, those plants from the jungle, or whatever they are from, when you go to cut them down with the chainsaw, it's like cutting through lots of paper. It's really hard to kill those things. Plus, when you start to cut them down, guess who lives in there by the hundreds? Cockroaches. We found every cockroach in God's green America in the bark of those trees. I was destroying their home gladly. So the first thing we had to do is get rid of all the non-native plants. You see that magnolia up against the house. That became a bird feeder actually in the backyard. And we took the irises. We still saved some of the irises because Terry has something for irises, and because there's a long story there, and that's okay. That's okay. They don't flower because they don't get enough sun. But when we bought the house, this is the stuff we had: St. Augustine grass, Nandina, olive, boxwood, magnolia, ligustrum, sago, and other palms. We had purple heart, liriope, vinca, Asiatic dayflowers, and garlic. That was what our yard was. Not really what we wanted. So a lot of people might look at this and go, my gosh, what a beautiful backyard. I had a different vision of what it could be. So we started with this house with front yard. This was 2018, right after we bought the house. 2 years later, we didn't do anything with the house yet, but we did do a little bit with the yard. Okay. So we put up a picket fence, and in my case, we have deer that live all around us, whitetail and axis. They've never been inside that picket fence. Not one deer has jumped over it, or not one deer has tried to go underneath it. I think it's because it's such a small yard. We have 0.23 acres. Included in the 0.23 acres is a house, a garage, a storage shed, a huge back deck made of rock. So there's not a lot of green space to work with. But the deer have never been, I say that I'll get home tonight, and there'll be 16 axis deer that have eaten all the garden. And one of the things that I also learned through this process is what you have 1 year, 2 years later, it's going to look completely different, because the flowers are going to sort themselves out. Some of them are going to like each other. Some of them are going to do battle. Some are just going to die out because it's not right. You'll notice that we deal with a lot of shade because of the pecan trees, but it's kind of a dappled shade. That's what I tell everybody anyway. And most of the wildflowers that I've grown there, most, not all, but most of them have survived in dappled shade, even if they were sun-loving plants. Okay, so far. So here's July 2024. I took this this morning. Yeah, this morning, from one side of the yard and the other side of the yard. You can see we've got plantings all around the outside of the fence. We've got stuff on the inside. I've got all the appropriate habitat signs from all the different organizations to verify that I'm doing something. So we look very official, right? None of them are political in nature. But that's our front yard. And if you'll notice to the left on this upper right left-hand picture, that's the neighbor's yard. Their entirety of their yard looks like that, except that you'll notice there's some bleeding now, where there's some cowpen daisy sneaking over into the yard. Lots more straggler daisy. There might even be a couple of Engelmann daisies that have made their way there. So it's starting to happen. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. So looking from the house, this is when we started. This was a year and a half later, looking out the front yard. And if I do it right, this was this morning. You'll notice if you go back and forth, look at the heights of the plants. You can't tell the species or anything, but you'll notice that things have filled in. Things are different heights. Yes. Alamo vine. I'm just telling you, it's a great plant. There's a bee called the crooked-legged bee. That's the only thing they focus on morning glory, members of the morning glory family, and they get into the little hole. I might have a video, I may not. They get into the tube and they spread their legs like this, and then they collect all their pollen. But they call them crooked legs because their back legs are really long, so they can prop themselves inside that opening. They're fun to watch. And it grows great on a trellis, but those seeds, pretty viable, that drop to the ground. And so suddenly you find we probably have more Alamo vine than maybe we, yeah. We started with maybe 3, and now we've got maybe 53, something like that. Maybe not that bad. So that was the front yard. That's how we transitioned to front yard. The backyard, the first thing we did was we got rid of all those palm things. Here's a yard looking back at the house. So you can see how big the deck was. So we didn't have a lot of green space there to work with. And the one thing I did, one of my goals in my backyard, and this is important when you're doing this, what are our goals? We had this yard, by the way, that ivy that was growing up there was taking over 6 feet of the ground, coming out and looking like it was going to attack the house eventually. And then came Storm Uri in 2020, killed the thing. Best thing that could have happened. Best thing that could have happened. But you'll notice there's no shrub layer, there's no understory, there's invasive vines, there's a sterile ground layer. My goal in the backyard was to go, we're going to fill in all of that. Because just like out in a woodland, if you fill in the woodlands, what do you get? Lots more birds. Okay? Lots more birds. And so that was our goal in the backyard, was to do that. The first thing I wanted to do to start attracting those birds was to bring in some water. We happened to have this old concrete fountain. It wasn't working. We fixed it up, and the cedar waxwings came. And by the way, when cedar waxwings poop, they drop 3 seeds in each scat, and each one of those turns into a ligustrum or a hackberry. And after pulling thousands and thousands of them, I can tell you it's always 3. Okay? Apparently that's their capacity for poop. And then later we had a bunch of flat rocks laying around from the extras, I guess, on the porch. And we took those and turned them into a water feature. Another way to attract birds. We got some moving water now. By the way, that thing over on the left literally fell apart. With the water, it finally just dissolved. So it's no longer with us. And then look at all the birds it attracted. Oh, wait a minute. That's the wrong slide. Darn it. Wow, that's really the wrong slide. Sorry about that. I don't know how that slipped in there. Did you put that on there? Ethan, I told you to take that out. All right. So I have gotten some really good birds, as hopefully this video will show. Yeah. How many of you have had a western tanager in your backyard? Oh, thank you. Back out. Yeah, some people always have to one-up you. But that was a real surprise to be able to see a western tanager in my backyard, our backyard. So pretty cool, right? And then the robin's like, why are you here? So anyway, this is what it looked like this morning. So that water feature at that time was wide open. There was no cover for the birds, so there was always the risk that the hawks that live in the neighborhood could come through and easily sweep out the birds. Now we've got elderberry growing up there. We've got indigo bush. We've got Turk's cap. We've got some asters growing around it, maybe a few too many there. Columbine, some other things. And so what we're doing is building this habitat that eventually that's going to be a great place for little birds to come in, and they have a lot less worry about being picked off by a raptor, because we get all kinds of raptors come through the yard. And then what I started doing, instead of trying to do it all at once, because this is a 6-year project ongoing, in the backyard we had these weird little these things, those rocks, by the way, became part of the water feature. So we dug those out, and today what we have, we actually dug those chunks of rock out. We dug this out because one thing I didn't tell them. This will discredit everything. Because we live above Cibolo Creek, you can dig down as far as you want and you can't find any rocks. Sorry, yeah, no, it's not fair. But so what? It's our yard. So we don't have any rocks, so we've got great soil, down to about 18 inches, and then it turns to clay. But what we did is we dug this out, and I buried a liner, and we filled it back in with soil to create a wet garden. So I've grown cardinal flower there. I've grown some other plants. I've got bluebell gentians in there right now. I've got some things that normally wouldn't grow in my yard. And so it's a different kind of wet area. And then we planted frostweed around that tree. That frostweed today is about 8 feet tall. Literally today is about 8 feet tall. So that's what we did with these little areas. Here's what they look like today when I took the picture. So they're starting to fill in. You'll notice that we still have some grass because we have this delightful little dog named Allie that needs to have some space. Although I'll give Allie credit, she'll go through a prairie as well as any dog. But you can see things are starting to take over the sidewalks and other things. I'm okay with it. I'm just giving her a hard time. She's very patient with all of this. And then we took this little section of yard, gouged that thing out of the ground, and we started putting some things in. It took some time, but it starts filling in. There's what it looks like this morning. Okay, those pictures actually do look better over there, frankly. Just so y'all know. They seem a little clearer. But again, it's a gradual process, and we've added things. We've had to take out things because things that go crazy, okay? And you just have to accept that. Then we had this little side yard. We had to dig out vinca out of there. Then in 20, you see what's there. By 21, we've got that. That's today. Now, here's the reason I do this. Now, for some people, they would look at that and go, oh my God, it's a weed bed, okay? There's a Raphidium. Rusty Blackhawk. I can't even remember the names of all these things. There's a rusty blackhawk back in there that cardinals investigate all the time. They haven't nested there yet, but they will. And we've also now had cardinals start nesting in all these different places around the yard because of the plantings we made. They would have never even come close to our yard before we started. And I know it's a cardinal, but you got to start with somebody, right? And a cardinal's a pretty awesome looking bird, okay? So that's pretty cool. Here's the backyard today. We put up a privacy fence. You can't hardly see the privacy fence. That's what we started with up in the upper left-hand corner. So we're making some progress. And we've started adding layers. We need 3 more years to get those little small trees up high enough. But we are adding layers. Now, remember, where's Waldo? So where's Hensley in this picture? This was taken last winter, I believe. You took this last winter. Okay? This is winter, and everything is siniced, or the leaves have fallen off. And can you see me in that picture? Right there. Sitting in a chair in the back of my yard. So that's how fast this can happen. It doesn't have to take years and years and decades and decades. I can't even get back there this year. There's so much vegetation, which is great. But what I was able to do is I sat there. I had ruby-crowned kinglets come within a couple of feet of me. As long as I didn't move, they didn't know I was there. Okay, and Lincoln sparrows and white-throated sparrows and all kinds of things. So you can create this amazing habitat. We have springs where we'll get 10 or 20 painted buntings coming into our yard. don't have the right habitat for painted buntings, but they come, well, we do throw out white millet. That's probably an enticement. But they stay there for weeks. We had a pair that tried to nest until a hawk chased one of them into one of our windows this summer. And again, so in the backyard, just the backyard, we have 32 species of woody trees, vines, and shrubs. We have 4 native grasses. We have 46 native forbs that are back there. Forbs are wildflowers, things that die back at the end of the year. So like columbine, things like that. Okay, so that's the backyard. The front yard, we started right here. And this is where I think our neighbor, Patsy, probably thought we were insane when we started digging up this beautiful green lawn. Terry might have thought the same thing, I'm not sure. I got my fork and I started turning over the soil. In the first year, couple of years, we had lots of real pretty flowers, lots of low stuff, but it started to transition over time. And now all of a sudden, things got a little bit bigger and hairier. Here's other parts of the yard that we did piecemeal. Again, we didn't do it all at once. This is a lifelong project if you want it to be. But as we've improved it, it gets better and better and better and better as it evolves. And we let it mostly evolve by itself. But this becomes the source of a lot of the seeds that I grow. That's where every one of these came from, is up from our yard. And here you can see how the colors change over time out and even in the front of our yard. So, what's this all mean? So I keep an iNaturalist project at home. You'll note that I have 636 species that I've documented in my 0.23 acre yard. Now, granted, 150 of those are plants that I've planted, right? They're native, but they certainly weren't there when we got there. But I continue to document all kinds of things that come into my yard. Now you find out, I'm not going to go through all this, but these are samples of the different things that we have in the yard. Some have gone away. The desert willow we took away and gave to somebody else because we realized it was not going to be the right plant for our small space. So we do learn lessons as we go through. Our big tooth maple never grows because beetles, those dang June beetles, come out of our yard and just eat all the leaves. We have 6 different species of milkweed because everybody says plant milkweed for monarchs, right? I did, and the first time we got 3 eggs laid, it was on a butterfly milkweed, which is beautiful orange flowers, and it was blooming, and they ate all the flowers off. And then they got eaten. Big lot of help that did. We put in native grasses, and the reason we did that is because to offer structure. A lot of these plants are tall, and if they don't have anything to lean on, they just fall to the ground, and then they look terrible. I will tell you that Indian grass goes nuts, and in, what was it, 4 years? It went from this to literally that big around one plant. So we had to dig it up and separate it and do all kinds of things. So again, they're growing because they can. Here are some examples, just a few pictures supporting our, at least 100 species of native plants supporting native bees. Here's a few more when they're blooming. Give you an example. Here I've had 45 species of Hymenoptera, bees and wasps, come to this yard. Pretty amazing. The neat thing about these wasps that you're seeing here, all of them feed on the larvae or caterpillars of pest insects. So some feed on grasshoppers, some feed on those caterpillars that turn into June bugs. They actually they can listen on the soil for that larva underground and then dig down to them, insert an egg either on or in them, paralyze them, put the egg there, the egg hatches, eats all of the best parts, leaving the vital parts until the end of the process. All by themselves. I don't have to put any chemicals down. Now I still have too many June bugs, so I need more wasps. But it's a start. 143 different species of Lepidoptera. Now that's not just butterflies, because that would be the most awesome. Okay, I get a lot of moths. And of course, those moths, as you all know, have caterpillars that feed chickadees and titmice and cardinals and every other bird that's on the landscape. If it's not for those moths, we don't have those birds in the capacity that we have. And there's research out of, I think it's New York, that now shows that in those neighborhoods where they do a lot of spraying, they don't have enough caterpillars to raise families of chickadees out there. So when you consider going and having somebody come to your yard, and we've seen it in our neighbor's yard, they come out and they spray in that tree, all they're doing is killing off food for the birds. Okay, and then they go and plant plants for the animals. Like, you can't have both. We've had over 70 species of birds show up in the yard. None of these are great pictures, but it's pretty amazing what has shown up there. I've even had a zone-tailed hawk. Now, granted, it was 200 feet up in the air flying over the house. Our yard goes all the way to the heavens. Okay. And we've had sandhill cranes fly over. Yes. They haven't landed yet, but we're hoping. Now I'm going to give you 4 plants that if you're going to plant anything, shrubby boneset in the fall when it blooms gets every pollinator's attention. It's a beautiful shrub. It blooms for weeks. It's easy to grow, and it's found all around us. Crucita, which grows actually farther south, but it is very well adapted to this area. When these Crucita and shrubby boneset are blooming at the same time, everything goes to Crucita. They shift over. Yep. But a fantastic plant. Then there's cowpen daisy, which grows all around us. It's an annual, it's a weedy plant, but it flowers over and over and over again all summer long. Self-seeds readily. And then its cousin, frostweed, which is a perennial, blooms in the fall, another great plant. And these fall bloomers, by the way, for the migrating monarchs, are critical to their fattening up enough so they can get to Mexico. So they can be eaten by black-headed grosbeaks and the other birds that eat them down there. Okay. By the way, frostweed, the name of it, most of you know, it forms these beautiful frosty things when the water in the bottom of the stem, when it gets below 32, the water freezes, bursts the stem, forms these things. And by the way, one of the first cards I gave to Terry when I was romancing her was that frostweed that looks like a heart. Thanks. I didn't give her the one that looked like a bat. Now, one of the times, this is just a little aside story here. I was looking at this frostweed, and it looks like mountains. It looks like you're in the Appalachians, not the Appalachians, the Himalayas. And I noticed a little red thing down in there in that circle. It's hard to see. You can see it a little better maybe on that image. And so I thought, what is that? Maybe it was a drop of blood from a bird or something. And so I got closer, and there was a guy actually climbing up in there. So I thought that was kind of different. Again, the things you learn. Anyway, so this is an ongoing process. I'm going to continue to weed. I'm going to continue to move things around. I'm going to continue to look for new things. I'm going to continue to document. And I got to tell you, as Terry can tell you, I get a lot of joy from this yard. Okay, I've been very blessed to work in the profession I've wanted to work with in all my life. So I get all these experiences, and now I've brought them home. And I would encourage you to consider doing it in your yard. And some of you probably have. I know some of you have. And you can tell the same stories. But the other thing I'm going to do is keep growing more plants. Those were all from the spring, those flats. And so we bought this house. We've now turned it into this. And as Terry likes to say, what is that phrase when we drive up? It looks all buttoned up. A little cottagey cottage with lots of life going on in there. And frankly, we love it. So in the end, and I'm just going to read this. I wrote this out earlier, and I didn't memorize it. But in the end, this journey might only matter to me and those insects and frogs and toads and birds and plants that have been invited to our yard. In the end, the next person that buys our home may look at what we've done and rip everything out, taking the yard back to the biological desert like those of my neighbors and so many others. But in the end, I will know that I did what I could, make a positive difference for the natural world for a short while, and perhaps my efforts will spur others to consider the benefits of planting native plants to welcome bees and butterflies and birds to the space where they all call home. And through my efforts, I can truly read this quote by the Lorax and know that I tried. Because unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. do too bad on time. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you tonight. I hope that this was meaningful and not a waste of your evening. And thanks, Ethan, too, for the helping with the greenhouse, and Terry for putting up with me. I think have you come to one of my presentations before?
Good question.
Oh, that's true. Yes. It's been a while, though. It's been a while. Yes, it has been a while. When she was chasing me around, she was coming to my presentation.
So let people speak into this so people on Zoom can hear too.
You provide a list of the combination of larval pollinator plants, because most people, concentrate on the pollinator plants, and usually the background of nature has a lot of the larval plants.
Right.
It creates a huge, I've seen 500 butterflies moths in my back area because of the larval.
Right. So yeah, so there are two really good books that have been put out by Lynn. What are those? There's a book that's the native plant sources to the larval butterflies and larval moths, two different books that have been published with that, and that's probably your best source instead of asking me to memorize. Remember that?
Right.
But that is one thing. If you're going to plant things for the pollinators, consider, does that thing host a moth or a butterfly or another thing that will feed on the leaves? And don't be surprised if that happens and all you go out and all of a sudden it's like, my God, where'd all the leaves go? The plant usually will come back. Right now, we've got snowberry clearwing moths that laid their eggs on our honeysuckle, and they have decimated those leaves, but the plant's doing just fine. I just soon have the clearwing, moths. Okay, yes. I guess I need to stand over here.
Water when you
we do mostly hand watering. If we get the opportunity, if we're not in a drought, we can put a sprinkler on if we need to, one night a week. We did put in we just purchased our first little line, and then it started raining. So I guess that's all you need to do. What's that? Yeah, that's right. And then when we ran that line, we found that I built some bee houses for bumblebees. Red wasp moved in, and they were none too pleased when I was running that line past their little box. So I won't be doing much with that for a few months. But I don't do any drip at this point. Yes.
wait.
Oh wait.
So the people on Zoom can hear.
Oh, thanks.
Oh,
Since you're close to the creek,
Yeah.
There's frogs around. Is your water feature big enough to support them?
Yeah. In fact, we get leopard frogs back there all the time. We get a lot of Gulf Coast toads, and you witness. I'll let Terry tell this story.
wait.
Yes, we have leopard frogs leaping up out of our water feature to try to catch hummingbirds. We've seen it more than once. They haven't been successful, but the hummingbird comes in, is sort of hovering above the water, and the leopard frog comes flying out of there. It's fascinating.
When the first time she saw that last summer, I thought she had lost her mind. And it turns out I got to see it multiple times. Never caught the hummingbird, but I put a camera out there in the hope. Because wouldn't that have been a neat posting? Not for the hummingbird, but yeah, we actually, in fact, this spring when we went and we had a couple of cold nights that froze the water in the feature because it's not very deep, obviously. Unfortunately, some of those frogs that overwintered there died, but we did have one. I don't know if you ever saw the article years and years ago. There's an article called Frog Sickles. Frogs can actually get down in the ice and freeze in the winter, literally freeze, and then they thaw out in the springtime up north. Really pretty cool. And one of those frogs actually did thaw out and survive. Yeah, pretty cool. I know, it's kind of weird, but So the one thing we have not seen in our yard, except for a earth snake, we have never seen a snake in the yard, a sizable snake in our yard. And you'd think something would come up from the creek.
I bet they're there. You just can't see them.
Well, that could be it too. So
Did I tell you? Don't you want to just go out and do something like this? This is great. Thank you, Craig.
you betcha. Thank you for inviting me, Pastor. Always good to see you. And by the way, those plants are there for the taking. We can take them home, but just so you, most of you are probably familiar with a beautyberry. we found that the beauty berries, when the seeds, the fruits ripen in the fall and the Orioles are migrating through, they will just flock into these things and eat the beauty berries. The Turk's cap, of course, great for hummingbirds and certain butterflies that will nectar on those red flowers, of course. The fruits are actually edible. And then the, you know what Phloemacanthus has, those tubular flowers, great for hummingbirds and certain kinds of butterflies. Exactly. And then this one is one that a lot of people hear the name aster and they go, oh, I don't want any asters. This is Texas aster. Beautiful. It can get this tall. It mostly blooms in the fall. This year we've had them bloom in the spring. We've got them blooming right now, and then they'll do a big bloom in the fall. But before the cosita blooms and before the shrubby boneset blooms, and this is blooming, all the butterflies and pollinators use these flowers. They're small composites. They're light pale purple ray flowers and yellow disc flowers. And they're really easy to grow. So I've got like 200 of them. So please take those. But anyway, you are welcome to them. They've been in pots now for quite a while. They've got good root systems. They just got 2 inches of rain on them. So they should be in great shape. Yeah. Yeah, I grow it in part shade and full shade and dappled shade. It's actually, it is, because when you find it in the wild, it's usually down along a wooded creek bottom or along the edge of a woods. So that one has been the easiest one to grow because I can put it anywhere in the yard, literally, right? Anywhere in the yard and it's blooming. So, yeah.
Okay, free plant.